The Crypt interviews in association with Mayo Leisure Point Castle Bar.
You're listening to The Crypt, and this week's special guest is writer and director Christopher Landon, who is best known for The Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse, the Paranormal Activity franchise, and Disturbia. So you're very welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, firstly, Chris, I want to talk about how your career started. Now, you're the son of the late, great Michael Landon, who listeners will know as Charles from Little House on the Prairie. So being born into the spotlight, was that a factor in your decision to work behind the camera rather than in front of it?
I think there's actually two parts to the answer. I think first, I think growing up in the shadow of someone else who was in the spotlight kind of made me shy away from being in front of the camera. And so I wasn't comfortable being an actor. I didn't have any desire to be an actor. But that said, I loved visiting my dad on set and watching him work, and I was fascinated by the process. And then as a kid growing up, he and I would watch horror movies together late at night when everybody else went to bed. And my dad loved horror movies, and it was this thing that people didn't know about him, this sort of dark side that he had, because all of his work was so family-oriented. And so I think that was really where my desire to make films came from. It was just those late nights watching, the classics like Halloween and Rosemary's Baby and Thing and all this other stuff that just really got me excited about making movies.
And that's exactly where my love of horror came from. I used to sit with my dad late at night as well and watch all the horror movies. So that's where my obsession came from too.
That's awesome.
Well, then in 2007, you had a massive #1 box office hit with Disturbia, starring Shia LaBeouf. Superb movie. And I was wondering, was the 80s movie Fright Night an inspiration for you when writing that? Because it was similar in terms of, instead of the vampire next door, it was a serial killer.
It's funny. And I love that movie, but it never oddly consciously entered my mind when I was writing that movie. When I set out to write Disturbia, the whole idea came to me when I was listening to the radio. They were doing a news report on Martha Stewart when she was on house arrest, and that's what sparked the idea. I was like, oh, what would happen if someone was on house arrest and they were bored out of their minds? What would they do? They would start kind of spying on their neighbors, and suddenly it became this idea that was sort of a collision between a John Hughes movie, which was very much an inspiration for me, and Hitchcock. And so it was more Rear Window in terms of inspiration versus, Fright Night is obviously deeply inspired and motivated by Rear Window. So I think that was really, for me, the bigger influence was definitely John Hughes and Hitchcock.
And then following that, you came on board as the writer for the last 4 Paranormal Activity movies and also the director for the Mark ones. So how did you come to be involved in the franchise?
So I got a call one day from the head of Paramount at the time, who they were just starting to make Paranormal Activity 2, and they were having some difficulty. And so they assembled a room of writers. They do this a lot, in Hollywood. They'll bring in a group of writers to kind of brainstorm and pitch ideas and try and sort of come up with stuff. And I pitched a sequence that ended up in the movie. There was a scene where the mother gets dragged out of the nursery and down into the basement of the house. And I pitched that scene in that meeting, and the head of the studio took me aside and said, I feel like a good fit for this. Would you mind working more on it? And so it was kind of an accident, and I just started writing, and then I just stayed on for you.
And what's it like to write and direct a found footage movie in comparison to a regular movie? It's
funny because I think people watch found footage movies and they think, oh God, that's so easy, I could do that. And I can honestly say I think it is 10 times harder than writing a traditional movie, only because you're burdened with having to justify this camera, that shouldn't be there. Like smart people would have thrown the camera on the ground and run away a long time ago. And so it's that constant sort of having to figure out ways to justify the existence of the camera. And it's also in terms of building scares. It's really difficult because you can't rely on sort of the traditional coverage that a normal movie gets, like placing the camera in multiple places and having all these other angles. You don't have a musical score to tell people when to be afraid.
Yeah.
So you're lacking all of these devices that really help create tension. And so you're really having to sort of do this completely on your own with a single point of view. And so writing those movies was incredibly challenging. But at the same time, I think it was really rewarding as well, because it allowed me to sort of, I had to be really crafty and creative to try and figure out ways to scare people.
So a learning experience too at the same time.
Yeah, definitely.
Well then, moving on to Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse, there are no words for how much I love this movie. I just thought it was hilarious. So you co-wrote and directed it. So for those who haven't seen it yet, can you tell listeners a bit about the plot?
Sure. So the movie is about 3 scouts who have been lifelong friends, and they're at a crossroads in their relationships because they've outgrown it, want to move on and be high school kids and be adults and pursue adult things. And while they're sort of trying to figure out how to break out of scouts, their town is ravaged by a zombie apocalypse. And so it's up to them to save the day and at the same time sort of come to terms with where they are in their friendship.
Well, I think so many people our age live with a pure nostalgia for the 80s, which is something I think you really captured in this movie. I loved the theme of friendship throughout, and I think it was really kind of a Goonies meets a Romero movie. Did it take you long to find the right 3 actors to play the scouts? Because obviously, given the theme, it would be important for them to have great chemistry, which they did.
Yeah. I was very lucky that I had a studio that really supported my vision and the decisions that I wanted to make, especially in regards to cast. And the first person that I cast in the movie was Ty Sheridan, who plays Ben. And, I was already a huge fan of Ty Sheridan. I had seen him in the movie called Mud, and he completely blew me away. And he was an unconventional choice for the movie because he had come from the indie world and specifically indie dramas. And so I think when I cast him, some people got a little bit nervous only because, he has to carry the movie and there's it's a lot of comedy. But when I met with Ty, I knew right away that he could do it. And the thing that I loved about him so much was that he actually grounded the movie, because everything that's happening in it is so ridiculous and over the top and silly that it was nice that there was a performance at the center of the movie to kind of still keep the movie on its feet.
Yeah.
And then it's funny, when I cast anything, I always tell people it's sort of like going on a date, like you kind of know right away if you're in love or not. And that happens every time with me. It's never like I'm hemming and hawing and trying to figure out which person to choose. When they walk into the room, almost before they even start speaking, I get this kind of vibe, this feeling, and I go with it. And when I put these 3 actors together, and we did like a camera test one day, and we went out into the woods and did one of the scenes from the movie, and we also did some improv work, and it was immediate. Their chemistry, they all felt like they had been friends their whole lives. And that's this whole movie lives or dies on that chemistry, because if these guys weren't convincing as best friends, and if you didn't like watching them together, then this was just going to be a terrible movie.
Exactly.
And so I got very, very lucky with this cast. They were all fantastic. They were fun to work with. It couldn't have been a better experience. I was really, really lucky.
Well, another thing I loved was the strong female character Denise was, and she wasn't your typical fall over every time she runs. She really kicked ass in this movie. Yeah.
So funny thing about that character. So when I came on to this project, this was a script that had already been written. And my first issue with it was that there was no Denise. There was no female character in the movie. And I immediately said, we need a strong female presence in this movie. And it was, again, to go back to your comment earlier about the 80s, it was the sort of, this idea of those strong, like Kelly LeBrock, Weird Science. Like I wanted this kind of tough, hot, amazing girl that was going to show these guys how to man up. And that was a big note for me. And so I created that character so that we had someone to kind of lead these boys not only through the night, but also through their own sort of personal journey as well.
She was an excellent actress choice
She's
as well.
great.
Well, then the gags in the movie are brilliant. There was no holding back with some of them. Especially the scene where he's falling out the window and what he grabs onto.
Yeah, exactly.
So were there many scenes that didn't make the cut that you'd wish they'd left in, that they felt you'd gone too far?
Yes, there was one scene in particular that the studio made me rewrite because they said I had definitely gone too far. And to be honest, it was risky. And I kind of knew that going into it. And I didn't want to offend people, but it was also, I found it very funny. I have a twisted sense of humor. And I also kind of come from the sort of the school of South Park, in terms of like, I think everyone is fair game. I think you can't selectively make fun of people, like I like to poke fun at everyone because that's life. So, there's a scene in the movie, and I'll probably get in trouble for even telling the story, but whatever. So there's a scene in the movie where the boys where our group is walking, and they come across a homeless zombie, and they end up doing this Britney Spears single with the zombie. And that scene, as it was originally written, was actually they're walking along, and they come across a school bus. A short bus, as we call it here in the States. I don't know if you have the same terminology, but a mentally disabled person climbs off the bus and starts walking toward them, and they can't figure out if he's a zombie or if he's just mentally disabled.
Oh, Christ.
And so they're having a whole debate while this zombie is getting closer and closer to them until they finally realize that he's not just disabled, he's actually going to try and eat them. And it was a really funny scene.
Oh, I can imagine.
But it was, they felt very strongly that they were going to get a lot of unhappy letters and didn't want to risk it. And I understand that, and I respected it. But I had to change that scene at the last minute. It was definitely something I had to throw together quickly. And look, it worked out in the end, and it's still a fun scene.
Well, that's it. It was a brilliant scene. When it started first, and he was walking up and he looked at the T-shirt, and then he started, you're going, what the hell is he doing? And then you are just in the knots laughing from there on. It is brilliant.
Yeah. And plus it was like, the movie, while, you're dealing with a lot of tropes, and you're dealing with a lot of stuff that, paths that we've been down before, so to speak, I always try to at least present something new in every scene. And so in that scene in particular, and it was funny because I remember, again, the studio sort of reacted sort of oddly to it because, I was clearly presenting the first, as I saw it, the first openly gay homeless zombie.
Brilliant.
And they were like, why does he have to be gay? Or like, why is he a Spears fan? And I was like, guys, it's funny. Like, this is a guy that existed in the world at one time, there are gay homeless people out there. So it was an opportunity to do something off the wall and completely ridiculous, but also really fun.
Well, like you said there, we had the singing zombie there, so like you kind of threw the rule book out when it came to what zombies are supposed to be like. So what was the story when it came to deciding on what type of zombies you would have in the movie?
It was funny because, I think most zombie films are burdened with these rules of, are they fast zombies? Are they slow zombies? Are they aware? Are they not? Are they just sort of mindless? And for me, it was like, I didn't care because it's a comedy, it's a horror movie, but it's a comedy first. And I felt like, my general rules in terms of movement, because we actually did spend a lot of time debating this. My rule was if they were old and slow in life, they were old and slow as zombies. And if they were fast and healthy in life, then they could be fast, in death. So that part didn't matter to me. Where I was pushing the boundaries was the sense of these zombies some zombies had a sort of an awareness of their former life, and so, for example, the very first zombie that we meet is in the strip club. Yeah. And our zombie comes out and she actually starts doing it routine. And for me, that was just the fun of giving them sort of a connection to the life they had before. but also just because you get to come up with situations that are really entertaining and really funny when you allow these zombies to be characters and not just background, you know?
That was all part of the fun of that movie.
Yeah, it was like, I didn't, again, it was, so, you know, and it's funny because I remember there were people who, you know, it's the worst thing in the world for a filmmaker to do, to like go online and like start reading comments, you know?
Yeah.
And some people were very irate about the rule book thing, that I had sort of disregarded it. But my kind of response to that was sort of like, you know, throwing up two middle fingers and saying, I don't care. Like, I wanted to have a good time in this movie. And hopefully that's what you were doing instead of analyzing zombie movement.
Well, that's it. If you stuck to a rule book, sure, it wouldn't have been the same film at all.
No, it would have been boring.
Exactly. Well, then, as well as that, you really did keep it 80s style because you used practical special effects during the movie. Was that very important to you to have that?
Yeah, 100%. That was as you know, when we were in pre-production on the movie, a hard rule was if we can do it practically, then that's how we were going to do it. I wanted as little you know, visual effects in the movie as possible, even though, you know, most of our headshots and those kind of exploding heads and whatnot are all digital. But like, you know, even it was funny, like when we did, there's a scene in the movie where they are in Mrs. Fielder's house and they get attacked by one of her zombie cats. And I remember when I was looking, when we made the puppets, I think, you know, there were a couple producers on set that got a little nervous. They were like, oh, that looks terrible. And I said, I know, that's the point.
Yeah. It really, that made that scene. If it was CGI, you wouldn't have got the same laugh.
Because you can't try to be scary. You have to try to be, for me, again, it was more about referencing the films of my childhood that I loved. And you hit it on the head when you mentioned Goonies and when you mentioned, you know, Gremlins and all these other movies that were such a strong influence for me in making this. It's the nostalgia factor of it all. Yeah. And like, you know, if a computer generated cat climbed over his shoulder, it would look like we were trying to be scary as opposed to trying to be funny.
Yeah.
And so that was why I stuck to that. But we really did. I mean, every creative decision that we made on the movie adhered to sort of the principle of this is an 80s movie that happened to be made, you know, in 2015.
But that's it. You look at Stranger Things that came out there on Netflix. Everybody has just gone crazy for that. It was fantastic. Yeah, it's true. I think there's a real appetite for 80s nostalgia right now. And so people who saw this movie, you know, and the ones who really understood what we were trying to do, they got it and they got the joke, which is nice. You know, it's taken a minute for this movie to sort of find its real audience, because I think there was such a saturation of zombie movies that we kind of got a little lost in the noise. But for the people out there who have discovered the movie, it's great to see how much they love it. Do you ever think there'll be a sequel? No. Well, I wish I could say yes, because, you know, I really, 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 really wanted to do it. You know, it's funny because when we were shooting the movie, and this was before we knew that Warner Brothers was aggressively pursuing a reboot of Gremlins, I jokingly said, oh God, can you imagine if we did, you know, Scouts versus Gremlins? But no, I mean, I wish we could. And I think the whole cast, we would all jump at the chance to get back together and make another one. But the reality is the movie didn't perform financially as strongly as it would need to warrant a sequel, you know, over here in Hollywood. Unless, you know, over time we develop a big enough of a cult following where they realize that it's something that people want. And, you know, it's such a shame because that's better. I thought that film was better than half the movies I've seen at the cinema this year. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, like I said, you know, it's funny. It's really, really difficult sometimes because when you release a film, it's, you know, for a filmmaker, it's especially challenging because, you know, you kind of live in a vacuum. You know, you sort of are inside this movie for so long. And then finally when it's done, you have to hand it over to other people. Mm-hmm. And sometimes just the timing of things, you know, it's got to be, the stars have to align for a movie like this to really make it in today's market. And so I think, you know, we kind of struggled with a difficult release date and a few other factors that kind of made the movie disappear. Such a shame. I know, it's a bummer. But, you know, I wouldn't change anything in terms of the experience. I had so much fun making this movie and got to work with such talented people. And I'm proud of it. And like I said, the people who have actually seen the movie really appreciate it. Well, then you had another horror out this summer that you co-wrote called Viral. So I haven't seen this yet. So what's that movie about?
So Viral is about two sisters who end up quarantined inside their house during a viral outbreak. And it's much more of a suspense thriller kind of a deal, because it has some very loose connections to a zombie movie, if you will, but it's not at all. It's a very, very contained thriller, but it also is it's very different from my other work in that it skews much more dramatic, and the tone is very, very, very different. But it's a really fun movie as well that I hope more people will see too.
Is that out on Blu-ray now?
It is out now, so people should go watch it. I really enjoyed it. The directors of that movie, Ariel Schulman and Henry Joost, I worked with them on they directed Paranormal 3 and Paranormal 4, and we all became good friends and really enjoy working together. And so that was just another opportunity for the three of us to get together and make a movie.
Are there any other projects then you're working on at the moment?
Yes. So I am right now in prep on a new movie that I'm about to go shoot in November for Universal and for Blumhouse. And that movie is called Half to Death. And it is, if I had to describe it, it's sort of the horror version of Groundhog Day. But it's but again, because it's me and because I have a certain kind of tone and taste, it has a lot of comedy. So it's really, really, really fun. I'm super excited about this one. So be out sometime next year.
Excellent. And then, Chris, before I let you go, where can people follow you on social media?
Oh, God, I'm the worst with social media. I have a sad little Twitter account that people can find me on. They just pop in my name. Otherwise, I'm on Instagram, and people can see the photos of my otherwise completely mundane life. Yeah, I know. It's one of those things where I kind of resist the social media thing, even though I probably shouldn't. But again, kind of, I think goes back to my whole desire to not be in front of a camera. But I encourage people to just go out and see my movies instead.
Exactly, and I can't recommend them highly enough, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this new one because you really hit the nail on the head with the balance between horror and comedy. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Well, Chris, I'm a massive fan, and I'll definitely have to get you back on for your next movie, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
The Crypt interviews in association with Mayo Leisure Point Castle Bar.